His own driveway turned into a battlefield. Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, parked her car, invited guests, and claimed his property as community space. She thought she was untouchable, but what she didn't know was that Robert had a plan, and when the truth came out, it shocked the entire neighborhood. Let's start from the beginning. Robert Wilson treasured his quiet life in suburban Atlanta. His home, nestled among the towering pines, was his sanctuary. Every morning, he would enjoy a cup of freshly brewed coffee while gazing out at his long, tree-lined driveway. To him, that driveway was more than just a path. It was a symbol of privacy, a buffer between the world and his peaceful retreat. But that serenity was shattered one crisp morning when he opened his door and froze. Parked right in the middle of his private driveway was a large, beat-up sedan. Its faded paint and mismatched bumper stood out like an unwelcome guest. Behind the wheel sat a woman, her face twisted in a look of irritation that suggested she was the one being inconvenienced. Robert stepped outside, his slippers crunching on the gravel, and tapped on the car window. The woman rolled it down with an air of dramatic reluctance. "Is this your car?" Robert asked, keeping his tone as neutral as possible. She scoffed, her voice dripping with condescension. "And what if it is? Aren't all the roads around here public?" Robert blinked, taken aback by her brazenness. "This is a private driveway," he said firmly. "It's part of my property." The woman's eyes narrowed. "Property? This is part of the neighborhood. My name's Karen, and I'm with the HOA. I have every right to park here," she declared, as though her position gave her ownership of the world. Robert felt a flicker of anger, but kept his cool. "I'm sorry, but this driveway belongs to me. I have the documents to prove it." Karen leaned back, crossing her arms defiantly. "Well, I don't care what papers you have. This road is as much mine as it is yours." Before Robert could respond, she whipped out her phone. "If you're going to harass me, I'll just call the police." Robert was stunned. Harassment? All he had done was ask her to move her car. Still, he knew better than to escalate things further. If Karen wanted to involve the authorities, so be it. When the police arrived, 2 officers stepped out of their car and approached. Karen immediately launched into a loud, dramatic tirade, claiming that Robert had threatened her and was trying to kick her out of a shared community space. Robert, maintaining his composure, presented the officers with the deed to his property. The officers studied the documents carefully. One of them nodded in acknowledgement. "Ma'am," he said to Karen, "this driveway is indeed private property. You'll need to move your vehicle." Karen's face turned bright red. "This can't be right. There's no way he owns this road. He's probably faking those documents." The officer sighed, clearly unimpressed with her argument. "Ma'am, unless you can provide proof to the contrary, you need to move your car." Karen crossed her arms and sat stubbornly in her seat. "I'm not going anywhere. He can take me to court if he wants." The officers exchanged a weary look, realizing this wasn't going to be resolved quickly. After a few more futile attempts to reason with her, they left, leaving Robert to deal with the fallout. As Karen's car remained parked like an immovable obstacle, Robert stared at the scene with a mix of frustration and determination. This wasn't just about a car anymore. It was about his rights, his home, and the principle of standing up against blatant disrespect. As he turned back toward his house, he made a silent vow. Karen may have declared war, but he wasn't going to back down. Robert sat at his kitchen table, a stack of papers spread out before him. The sun cast a warm glow through the window, but his mind was anything but calm. He carefully reviewed the documents, every deed, survey map, and receipt tied to his property. There was no doubt, the driveway, the pine trees, every inch of that road belonged to him. It wasn't just his belief, it was a legal fact. Yet Karen's brazen behavior left him uneasy. If she was bold enough to defy the police, what else might she try? He decided it was time to bring in reinforcements. With a resolute expression, Robert picked up his phone and called an attorney. The lawyer, a sharp and meticulous woman named Laura, assured him he had a strong case. "We'll get this sorted," she said confidently, "but keep documenting everything she does. The more evidence we have, the better." Meanwhile, Karen was far from giving up. She began a full-blown campaign against Robert, knocking on neighbors' doors, clipboard in hand, spinning a story about how he was hogging community space and disrupting neighborhood harmony. Some residents dismissed her antics, but others, whether out of genuine concern or fear of crossing her, signed her petition. Word spread quickly, and whispers began to ripple through the community. Robert noticed how some of his neighbors avoided eye contact when he waved. He tried not to let it bother him, but it stung. His peaceful little world was turning into a battleground. Then came the letters. Seemingly official notices from the HOA, they arrived in his mailbox with alarming frequency. Each one demanded payment for road maintenance fees or accused him of violating neighborhood regulations. The language was vague but threatening, clearly meant to intimidate him into compliance. Robert felt a knot of anger tighten in his chest as he held the latest letter. It was signed by Karen herself, her name scrawled in an almost triumphant flourish at the bottom. "She's using her position to harass me," he muttered, clutching the letter. The next blow came when Robert stepped outside one morning to find a freshly installed sign at the edge of his driveway. In bold black letters, it declared, "HOA, designated public parking." The audacity of it took his breath away. He snapped a photo of the sign with his phone, making sure to get a clear shot of the HOA logo in the corner. That was it. Enough was enough. Robert called the police again, hoping they'd finally take action against Karen's encroachments. When the officers arrived, he showed them the sign, the letters, and the deeds to his property. One officer furrowed his brow. "It's clear this is private property," he said, "but since this sign was placed under the HOA's name, it might require a legal injunction to have it removed." Karen, of course, was nowhere to be seen. Robert suspected she had watched the interaction from the safety of her house, smug in her belief that she was untouchable. As the officers drove away, Robert stood in the driveway, his frustration mounting. It wasn't just about the driveway anymore. It was about standing up to someone who thought she could manipulate and intimidate her way into getting whatever she wanted. Returning to his kitchen, Robert sat down with a notepad and began outlining his next steps. If Karen wanted a fight, he would meet her on the battlefield, but this time, he'd be armed with irrefutable proof and a determination she couldn't match. Robert stood in his garage, carefully unpacking a small box containing a set of surveillance cameras. The sleek devices gleamed under the fluorescent light, promising to be his silent allies in the escalating battle. He had decided that if Karen was going to keep pushing her limits, he needed irrefutable proof of her actions. The following morning, Robert installed the cameras himself, meticulously placing them to cover every angle of his driveway. The process was tiring, but it gave him a sense of control. Finally, he felt like he was one step ahead. Days passed, and the cameras quietly did their job. Then, on a crisp Tuesday morning, Robert got his first breakthrough. The motion sensor alert on his phone pinged, and he opened the live feed. There she was, Karen, marching up his driveway with the same indignant stride, her car parked smack in the middle of the private road. She scribbled something on a piece of paper, stuck it under a rock by his door, and stormed off. Later, Robert retrieved the note. It was a single, scrawled sentence. "If you keep this up, I'll see you in court." He couldn't help but shake his head. The audacity was staggering, but now he had video evidence of her trespassing and leaving a veiled threat. Determined to strengthen his case, Robert began reaching out to his neighbors. At first, some were hesitant to get involved, citing fear of Karen's wrath, but eventually, a few brave voices stepped forward. One neighbor, a retired teacher named Janet, recounted how Karen had tried to fine her for planting flowers that weren't on the HOA's approved list. Another man, whose garage faced the street, shared how Karen had once blocked his driveway with her car to teach him a lesson for leaving his trash cans out too long. The most damning testimony, however, came from a former HOA board member, Tom. Over a cup of coffee at Robert's kitchen table, Tom revealed the darker side of Karen's reign. "She's been pulling stunts like this for years," Tom admitted, shaking his head. "I left the HOA because of her. She manipulated rules, exaggerated fines, and even forged signatures to get her way. People are scared of her, but she thrives on that." Tom's stories painted a clear picture of Karen's misuse of power. Robert carefully documented everything Tom shared, knowing it would be invaluable. Then the cameras struck gold again. One evening, as Robert reviewed the day's footage, he saw Karen returning with her car. She parked on his driveway once more, this time adjusting the angle to block his vehicle entirely. Then, with a smug expression, she pulled out another note and taped it to his garage door. Robert retrieved the note and stared at it for a long moment. It read, "This is your last warning. Stop pretending this is your space." Enough was enough. Robert compiled the video evidence into a neat folder, complete with timestamps, and forwarded it to his attorney. As he sat back, looking at the stack of growing evidence against Karen, Robert felt a flicker of hope. For the first time in weeks, it felt like the tide was turning. The cameras had done their job, the neighbors were starting to support him, and Karen's unchecked behavior was finally catching up to her. The battle was far from over, but Robert knew one thing for sure: Karen wouldn't be able to manipulate her way out of this. Not this time. Robert's day began like any other, with the familiar scent of coffee brewing in his kitchen and sunlight filtering through the pine trees outside. But when he looked out the window, his calm morning came to an abrupt halt. His driveway, his private property, was no longer just occupied by Karen's car. It had turned into a makeshift parking lot. 3 cars, including Karen's, were lined up neatly, as if his driveway was some sort of community event space. Guests casually exited their vehicles, laughing and chatting as they strolled toward Karen's house. One of them even had the audacity to wave at Robert's camera, as though mocking him. For Robert, this was the final straw. He felt a wave of frustration and disbelief wash over him. How could someone be so blatantly disrespectful? He grabbed his phone, his hands steady with determination, and dialed both the towing company and the local police. The tow truck arrived within 20 minutes, its rumbling engine breaking the neighborhood's usual stillness. The driver, a burly man in a high-visibility vest, stepped out and assessed the situation. 3 cars, all on private property? He asked, confirming the job. Robert nodded. Every single one of them, and they've been told before to stay off my driveway. As the driver hooked the first car, the commotion caught Karen's attention. Her front door flew open, and she stormed out, her voice ringing through the air. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded, her tone a mix of outrage and panic. The tow truck driver remained unfazed, focusing on his task as Robert calmly stepped forward. "This is my property, Karen. You've ignored my warnings, and now I'm taking action." Karen's face flushed red as she pointed an accusatory finger at him. "You can't just tow my guests' cars. This is harassment. I'll have you arrested." Before the situation could escalate further, the sound of a police cruiser pulling up to the curb silenced the argument. 2 officers exited the vehicle, their expressions calm but serious. "What seems to be the issue here?" one of them asked. Karen wasted no time launching into a tirade, waving her arms dramatically. "This man is towing my car and my guest cars without any justification. He's out of control." The officer turned to Robert, who held out a neatly organized folder containing his property deeds and video evidence. "This is my driveway," Robert explained firmly. "It's private property, and she has repeatedly trespassed despite being warned multiple times. The cars are here without my consent." The officer took his time reviewing the documents, nodding occasionally. After conferring with his partner, he turned to Karen with a firm but professional tone. "Ma'am, this is private property. You and your guests have no legal right to park here without the owner's permission. These actions are, in fact, trespassing." Karen's mouth opened and closed as she struggled to form a rebuttal. The reality of the situation seemed to finally sink in, but her indignation wouldn't let her back down quietly. "You're taking his side. This is absurd. This driveway has always been used by the neighborhood." The officer remained calm. "Ma'am, the documents are clear. You'll need to remove your car or allow the tow truck to proceed." With no other option, Karen stood helplessly as the tow truck driver continued his work. One by one, the cars were loaded onto the flatbed and taken away. Her angry shouts echoed through the street, drawing the attention of curious neighbors who peeked from behind their curtains or stepped onto their porches. By the time the last car was towed, the street was filled with an awkward silence, broken only by the quiet murmurs of the onlookers. Karen retreated to her house, slamming the door behind her. Robert, standing tall on his porch, felt a mix of relief and vindication. It wasn't just about the cars, it was about standing up for himself and finally reclaiming his peace. As the tow truck drove off and the police prepared to leave, one of the officers gave him a small nod. "You did the right thing, sir. If she keeps this up, don't hesitate to call us." Robert thanked the officer and went back inside. He glanced at the security feed on his phone, ensuring that his driveway was finally clear. For the first time in weeks, his property truly felt like his own again. But he knew this wasn't the end. Karen wasn't someone to give up easily, and he needed to remain vigilant. As the evening settled in, Robert sat by his window, watching the street grow quiet. He sipped his coffee, feeling a renewed sense of resolve. Whatever Karen had planned next, he would be ready. The courtroom buzzed with low murmurs as Robert walked in, a man on a mission. Dressed in a neatly pressed suit, he carried a thick folder of evidence, camera footage, signed affidavits from neighbors, and his property deeds. His attorney, Laura, gave him a reassuring nod as they approached their table. Across the room sat Karen, her arms crossed tightly, her face a mask of indignation. Robert took a deep breath, steadying his resolve. This wasn't just about winning a case. It was about standing up for himself and for everyone who had ever been intimidated by someone like Karen. The hearing began, and the judge, a stern but fair woman with sharp eyes, addressed both parties. Karen's attorney tried to paint her as a well-meaning HOA chairperson, simply trying to maintain order in the neighborhood. But when it was Robert's turn, the tone of the room shifted. Laura began by presenting the security footage. The courtroom screens came alive with clear recordings of Karen parking her car on Robert's driveway, placing threatening notes, and even installing the HOA public parking sign without permission. The evidence was damning. Each clip seemed to chip away at Karen's defense, and murmurs spread through the audience. Next came the neighbors' testimonies. Janet described Karen's heavy-handed tactics with the flower fines, while Tom revealed her history of bending the rules and forging documents. Each story painted a vivid picture of Karen's misuse of power, her actions no longer seeming like isolated incidents, but part of a pattern of intimidation. Finally, Robert himself took the stand. He spoke calmly but firmly, recounting the months of harassment he had endured. His voice wavered slightly as he described the frustration of seeing his peaceful home turned into a battleground. "This isn't just about a driveway," he concluded. "It's about standing up to someone who believes they're above the rules. It's about protecting what's rightfully mine." Karen's lawyer attempted a rebuttal, but the evidence was too overwhelming. When Karen herself took the stand, her defensive tone and inability to refute the clear evidence only solidified the judge's perspective. After a brief deliberation, the judge returned with her decision. Based on the evidence presented, it is clear that the defendant, Karen, and the HOA violated the plaintiff's property rights. Furthermore, their actions caused unnecessary emotional distress and financial burdens. I am ruling in favor of the plaintiff, Robert Wilson. The room fell silent for a moment before the judge continued. Karen is ordered to pay compensation for emotional distress and damages. The HOA is to remove all signage from the plaintiff's property immediately and formally acknowledge that the driveway belongs to Mr. Wilson. Karen's face turned pale, her confident facade finally crumbling. The judge's words marked the end of her unchecked authority, and the murmurs among the spectators turned into whispers of approval. After the ruling, Robert stepped out into the cool afternoon air, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. For the first time in months, he felt a sense of peace. But the changes didn't stop there. Karen's position as HOA chairperson was quickly revoked. The neighbors, emboldened by Robert's victory, began to share their own grievances, leading to sweeping changes within the HOA. Rules were clarified, and a new, more cooperative leadership emerged. For Karen, the consequences were severe. Her reputation in the neighborhood was irreparably damaged. People who once feared her now avoided her entirely. As for Robert, this victory was more than a personal triumph. It was proof that persistence and courage could prevail, even against someone who seemed untouchable. Sitting on his porch that evening, he looked out at his now empty driveway with a sense of pride. The battle had been long and exhausting, but the outcome was worth it. His home was once again his sanctuary, and his story was a reminder that no one is above the law. As he sipped his coffee, a rare smile spread across his face. Justice, he thought, had truly been served.